Hello, I am John Najarian, and Rebelcon 2022 is almost here. We do have a virtual pass. The virtual pass gives you full access to everything, all the streams, the live trading sessions, all of our fabulous keynote speakers. So to learn more about what's going on at Rebelcon 2022, whether you're in person or virtual, check out marketrebellion.com/Dallas. Still waiting for our clapper, Jared.
We're still back to that, Jared.
Go on eBay or Etsy or something. I'm sure you can find one. Folks, welcome to the Rebel Edge. Yeah. Rebel Edge, Pete and I bring you our take on the big news of the day. We do the macro minute at the top. We'll give you some unusual activity, and we will also touch on some sports. So without further ado, that's a French word, Pete. I have to say that for the people out there that don't speak French. Let's get started. Macro minute. Okay, so the ECB, European Central Bank, takes their rates to the highest level since 2011. They did indeed do the 75 basis points, Pete, that you and I had talked about. And still, we're looking at an 85% chance that our Fed does the same on September 21st.
Yep, sure seems that way, John. And I'll tell you, this macro minute's already too long. I'll just say this. So put up a chart someday. Anybody at home, please do this, and you'll understand why this has been so important and why we emphasize this. John and I both were all over this for the last 5-6 months specifically. But look at the 10-year, look at the NASDAQ. That gives you your answer. 1 month ago, you look at the 10-year, it was 2.8. The NASDAQ was 1,000 points higher than it is today. Now you look at the 10-year. As the 10-year goes up, you look at the NASDAQ, it tends to go down. It's not always immediate, but over time, just take a look at that chart over the past month. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. That's my macro minute. Now, enough. Let's get after it.
All right, Pete. Well, I'm holding the old Apple 12 Pro Max right here. And Apple, of course, had their event yesterday. 2 new versions of the iPhone featuring emergency satellite communication. That might not seem important, but if you don't have connectivity to a tower, this could be something that saves your life.
Yeah.
They also have an A16 Bionic chip, Pete. They've got a new 48 megapixel main camera, which is huge. I mean, the incredible pictures people will be taking, and of course, always on display. What do you think, Pete? Enough to get people to upgrade?
Maybe. No is my real answer. And the only reason, and I say that as an Apple bull, a guy who's owned the stock for a hell of a long time. I continue to own it for all the right reasons. I think Tim Cook has been doing a magnificent job in the overall scheme of things. But you know, John, basically, what do we hear every single time now? It's like, okay, is it faster? Yeah. Does the battery work a little bit longer? Sure. Do they have the great chip in it? Yeah, that's all fantastic. The emergency satellite, that is great. But how many of us find ourselves in that situation? I mean, that's a very small number. Still great to have it. I'm not discounting that. But his focus on services and on chips, John, that's what makes this company so great. And I think Tim Cook is doing a magnificent job with that. And I'll tell you, I did see an interesting stat, John. How about this for a stat? The AirPods revenue is bigger than Twitter, Spotify, and Square combined revenue. How about that for just a number? Just to kind of think about that just for a minute. And I'm talking about just the AirPods, and I'm not talking about everything else. $23 billion in 2020 was the number for the the AirPods. So that says a little something about Apple right there.
Yeah, it does. Still a great buy. I'm with Pete, folks. I'm on this one, and I would buy more and have bought more on this dip. All right, Pete, let's talk about energy. Wholesale gas market likely to be $9 per million British thermal unit or BTU. That is a far cry from what it is in Europe, Pete, which of course encourages companies to export to Europe. The U.S. recently is more of an exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas, than Qatar or Australia. They used to be the two largest. Also, Pete, Chinese and Indian companies are buying fuel from Russia, not natural gas, but they're buying crude oil in huge numbers. And just to throw it out there, since there's all these sanctions on it and so forth, guess what, Pete? Since China's shut down, they're refining it and sending it to Europe. So Europe is still supporting Russia, and they know it. They just want to kind of pretend what's happening over here on the other side of the curtain isn't real.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, isn't it amazing that all these countries try to do that and they try to pull the wool over our eyes? And it's like, what? Wait a minute now. We're not fools. We see the whole process. One thing I will add to this whole conversation, John, is you talked about the shipping. That's an interesting aspect of it because of the fact that in Unusual today, we see a couple of those huge crude shippers hitting. So is that something that's coming in the not too distant future that we're going to start seeing? Maybe the prices start to rise. Maybe those companies start to have a nice little bit of a move to the upside with all of what they're shipping around. And you mentioned LNG. That is the focus right now. So that's something to keep an eye on. Names like Frontline and Nordic. There's many names out there, but I'll tell you, I think that's another way to kind of go around this whole thing in the energy space.
Yeah. Well, Pete, speaking around going around or over things, how about one of the biggest drone companies in the world?
Yeah.
This company, folks, makes both military and commercial drones. AeroVironment, which is AVAV. It's up $40 this year. So if you're happy and long this one, you're even happier today because it's up another 16%. Improved sales, obviously military applications like crazy, everything from, surveillance to perhaps delivery systems for the military. And even though they're, Pete, still posting a loss, their guidance is very positive going forward.
And that was the only thing I was going to mention on this whole thing, John, is you look at what they're doing and their earnings definitely improved. They were losing 15 cents a year ago. Now they're losing about 9 cents. You just want to have these companies make money. They're not there yet, but I think that they're on their way. I think they're pushing themselves in the right direction. So I think that's great. You talked about some of the looking a little bit more bullish than maybe in the past. I think for all those reasons, this is a name you're going to want to keep an eye on and don't let it get away from you too much. But certainly it's something I think that everybody would want to at least look at right now, because when you look at that chart, the chart looks pretty interesting, and it looks like the future still looks pretty bright for these guys right now, at least right now.
Right. And everybody thinks of General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. When they think of defense, you need to think of AVAV as well in that same conversation, Pete. All right. How about Ambarella? These guys make the semiconductor chips that basically make the cameras, the multiple cameras on these iPhones, iPads, Samsung products. Virtually everybody uses AMBA, Pete, AMBA. And this one is down huge this year, unfortunately, because a lot of semiconductor stocks have been clocked because of demand being sapped by overproduction.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, John. They're in the forefront of a lot of things, but they've got to prove to us again. Like I just mentioned about the other, but they're doing better. But they've got to make some money. I mean, when you look at these earnings and you look at what they're putting out there, and look at what this stock has done just in the last year, John. I mean, the highs were at 227, the lows are at 60, and we're pretty close to those lows right now. So this is a stock that's been hammered. It got hammered over earnings about a week or two ago. So there's a lot of different reasons. I think in this particular case, I'm not as excited about this name because it's going to take some time for them to grind through and start getting that positive momentum coming back. And we don't know when that's going to be, but it doesn't seem like it's right now, because when you look at that soft outlook they had, that's a much different view of things than AVAV that you were just talking about, where things are looking a little brighter. They're not looking a little brighter here. They're looking a little bit dimmer from what they're telling us.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it, Pete. There was a lot of optimism about it. There's still a shutdown in China. Until China reopens, a lot of the demand for camera function on iPhones, iPads, and all the rest. Yeah, we'll still buy it for ours, but China's a huge demand for that. And right now, they're probably not buying much with China shut down.
Right.
So I'd say this is a stay away for now.
Mhm.
What about an unusual pick, Pete? I have EWU. You and I
Ah,
have talked a lot
yeah.
about how these ETFs, exchange traded funds, for the downside have been showing up time and time again.
Mhm.
And this one's basically for, the European continent, for London and the UK.
Mhm.
Man, the EWU, when you've got 10,000 of these end of September, 28 puts
Mhm.
changing hands, 10,000 is a million share equivalent
It's a big
because
number.
every option's for 100 shares. So if you're somebody, again, who doesn't trade options, this means somebody thinks there's a lot of downside for this one. They wanted a put that is struck right around where the market is right now. And I'm in these, Pete, and I'm
Mhm.
looking for downside. And I think with this 75 basis point move that we talked about on the macro minute, that's another reason that Europe might be, in a little bit of trouble.
And some of that energy cost they're going to be facing as well, John. I mean, that whole combination doesn't sound too good. So, Richard Branson, this guy's an interesting cat, right? I mean, he's on Shark Tank. He's done all these different things in his life, and he's always doing something that seems really cool. Well, Virgin Galactic is one of those, right? He's the founder of that. It's pretty interesting what they're seeing, John, but it's got 1 day for these to expire. So, that's something that's very interesting. And actually, we've seen quite a bit of that, especially this week. We've seen a lot of very, very short term paper. So these do expire, but they're buying the September 9th. That's tomorrow, the 6.5 calls here. So very inexpensive. And the stock is pushing right up against that level. It was about 630 at the time that these buyers of 3,200 of these paid from 2 cents up to 9 cents. Sounds ridiculous, but John, it's not that far away. If there's any kind of movement here, this stock could very easily get up and through that 6.5 level, but it's a cheap shot at something that's got to happen in the next 48 hours. Actually, even less than 48 hours. So
Yeah, 24 hours.
yeah,
Right.
something pretty interesting. The other thing too, John, that I'll mention real quick is
Mhm.
when you look at the float, well, it's 20% short. When you look at the outstanding shares, it's about 18% short. This is one of those kind of names that under the right circumstances, some sort of a squeeze, maybe these options could get a little bit, but it's got to happen in the next today or by tomorrow.
Right. And so, in other words, if you're a stock trader, I'd stay away for now.
Yeah.
If you're an options trader, unless you're experienced, you might also stay away because this is fast time decay.
Yeah.
But what I will say, Pete, is the stock's down 75 or 80% from the
Yeah.
highs it put in last year. That's because a lot of their flights got delayed and things like that.
Yep.
It was over 25. Now it's $6. I think it's worth taking a shot later, but I'm not joining this one today.
Right. Makes sense. Now we're on to sports. Well, let's hit the college game, John. I took a long look at what we're seeing, and you and I've highlighted at times on Tuesday. We've maybe talked about the NFL season kicking off on Thursday, or the college season extending now. Well, we're looking at a game this Saturday. How about Bama going out to Texas in Austin and taking them on? And what makes this interesting is everybody kind of knows that they've gone out, they've grabbed Texas, they've grabbed Oklahoma. They're going to be in the SEC. Obviously, the Big Ten did their whole thing with USC and UCLA. So a lot of this is very interesting. But can Texas hang with Bama? That's a really interesting question. Texas is not ranked very high. They're not ranked. And you look over at Bama, ranked number 1. They won 55-0 in their opening game against the Little Sisters of the Poor. So it's not that big of a – we can't judge that. But Bryce Young, who did win the Heisman Trophy last year, John, he ran for 5 touchdowns and threw for another one. So 6 touchdowns and what they've got. And I look at Texas. I'm not sure what you think, but it could be a great game. But I think that's just my side of the competition that I'd like to see. I think Bama's going to run these guys off the field. What do you think?
I agree. I think Matthew McConaughey, which I will predict, Pete, he will be interviewed before the game.
Yep.
He will be crying by the end of the first quarter, and it'll only get worse as the game goes on. And I love him. This is not me being a hater on Matthew McConaughey. Yeah. I love to see his passion for that school, Pete, but I'm with you. I don't know how they stay on the field with Bama, but I'm glad that they're going into the SEC and they're going to get a taste of what it's like to play those teams. And That's a whole different level of football there.
It is a different level for sure. And I'll tell you what, Bijan Robinson's great running back. He's unbelievable for Texas. They've got this freshman, John, Quinn Ewers, who's a quarterback who had a great open, but it was against Louisiana Monroe. So, I'm not going to go too much off of that one. I mean, Texas is a big behemoth, and they're taking on a team like that. They played well in the first game. This ain't ULM this time around, so I think it's going to be a little bit different. So, jumping on to the NFL. Now, we already talked about, are we going to see a Super Bowl preview tonight? Yeah, tonight, when we have some great football that's going to be played in the NFL. But I wanted to go all the way to Sunday, John. How about Green Bay and Minnesota? I think that's the number one game. We got 3 games. We're going to break them down real quick. Here's what I would say in that game, John. I look over and I see Aaron Rodgers, and he's not seeing Devontae Adams. I think that might be a problem, and you can't hardly name who the receivers are. Doesn't mean they might not have a great year, because I think Aaron Rodgers is that good. But what do you think about that game in game 1, John, with the Vikings? Kirk Cousins has not thrown a ball in an actual game that counted since going back to last January. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Pete, but I think you've already spoken of the 3 receivers they've got, and they just added a 4th. I got to give it to the Vikings. I'm not trying to be a homer and giving it to Pete for that reason, but you're right. Having a huge loss of a all-pro receiver that Green Bay had, they needed to pick up some people, and I don't think they surrounded Aaron Rodgers with what he needs to beat some of the best in the business right now.
And he's got some tackles that are a little beat up. They might play, they might not. I mean, that's a problem too, John. And they did improve on their defense. There's no doubt. They grabbed some kids out of Georgia, like everybody else, because Georgia put like 30 people into the NFL. But it's unbelievable what they did. Yeah. We got another one, John. How about the Raiders and Chargers? And here's an interesting part of the little twist on the whole thing and why I did it in this order. Derek Carr, you know who he's got back? Devontae Adams. They only played in college together at Fresno State, where they set all kinds of records together. And now they're back. Do you think the Raiders are back? Are they competitive enough to maybe be an AFC team in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I do, Pete, because you saw some of that stuff that came out about how Chucky, their ex-head coach that left last year, how he basically nixed the deal for Brady. Brady and Gronk were ready to come. He was just a nightmare for this franchise. They brought him back for whatever reason. He was not ready. The game has changed and has left him on the sidelines, but not as a coach. So I'd say, Pete, they are back, the Raiders, and I look for them to really do some big things this year, starting right away.
And we got one more, John, and then we're all done with the sports for today, and we're done with the Rebels Edge. But this is just too important. We got to hit this one as well. Pittsburgh. And why is it important to me? Because your old quarterback, Trubisky, is now the starting quarterback for Pittsburgh. And that's interesting because they had a great draft pick that they took right in their backyard. Kenny Pickett's an unbelievable quarterback, had a great preseason, but it is a preseason, so they decided to go with a veteran quarterback to start off the season. But, John, they got to go to Cincinnati. That is not going to be pretty because I'll tell you what, Jamar Chase and Burrows have got something going on. I think that whole team, offense, defense, special teams, they've really got a team that can be another Super Bowl team. What do you think happens in this game? And I think Cincinnati might even blow them out, but what do you think about this game?
Yeah, I got to say, Pete, that, they are 1 or 2 plays away from being Super Bowl champs.
Right, yeah.
And that's not taking anything away from Stafford and Darnold and all those guys. They played their faces off, and they deserve what they have. They are the champs.
Yep.
But now these guys still have that chip on their shoulder. They're from sort of a secondary city in America, Pete. And if you're from Cincy, I'm not trying to give you crap, Joe Kernan or anybody else. But this is, I think they have that chip. They're going to play with more swagger. And like you said, Chase, he is unstoppable, Pete.
He is.
So Burrow's healthy, and Chase means I think they win by more than the spread tonight.
They've put in a lot of receivers into the NFL coming out of that LSU, John. It just never seems to end. It's just absolutely amazing. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a great kickoff weekend for the NFL. I'm excited.
Yep. And Pete, I know that some of you have been pinging us repeatedly on Twitter or any of the socials. When are you guys coming back? When are you coming back? You know what? Tomorrow. I'll be back on the halftime tomorrow. So for any of the haters, and there are a few, and I love you guys and gals that are the haters because you make us better. But yeah, I'm going to be back tomorrow, Pete, on the halftime report, 12 p.m. Eastern time until 1 with Wapner and the crew. I don't know who the crew is yet, but I know I'll be back there. And I know you, Pete, have been taping a lot of specials and a lot of content for our streaming shows. So thank you. Pete won't be back till probably October,
well,
but I will be back
There's still
tomorrow.
some questions there. There's
and
still
I'm
some
looking forward
there.
to it.
There's still some question marks there.
Yeah, Pete, like I said, Pete's not a for sure, but I am tomorrow. I've got the emails. I'll be on tomorrow, ready to rock and roll, bringing some unusual activity. So we'll see you then tomorrow, folks. Make sure you tune in for Pete's The Take, 10:30 a.m. every day. That's 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. I'll be back with 3 at 3 later today, and we'll see you tomorrow on the halftime report. Bang.
Giddy up.